So the final part of this story happened in 2008. I met my first serious boyfriend when I was 15 in secondary school, 2005. We ended up being together for about 2.5 years. We were in the same year, myself being only 3 months older than him. We clicked with each other's friend groups quite well, so everyone tended to hang out with very few issues in between us. A few months into the relationship, though, some small red flags started to appear. Another guy tried talking to me once, to which my boyfriend threatened him. This landed him in detention, as it happened during school time. This was just the first of many times, though, that I began to see a very scary side of him. The other occurrences weren't massive, but in hindsight, they really were an indication of things to come. First was him smashing his bedroom window because I didn't want to go and get drunk with him one night. Him throwing drinks over me. When he started to rear his ugly side even more, he pinned me against a wall because one of his friends sat next to me on a sofa at a party. Thankfully, his friends pulled him off of me and gave him a stern talking to, but it was put down in the end at just having too much to drink and immediately forgotten about. Some time goes by and we briefly split up because he began taking a lot of drugs, mainly ecstasy and speed. I didn't really want to be having anything to do with all of that, meaning we spent a lot less free time together. So, in the end, I called it a day. We had been apart for about a month before getting back together in the end, during which time I had been casually chatting with someone else, which didn't really go anywhere. One morning, while we were still in bed, he got a text from a local friend and went to meet them, leaving me in his bed at his house. His mom, stepdad, and sister were all out. After about 5 minutes, I got up and went to use the bathroom when I heard his car screech to a halt outside. I could hear his front door fling open and smash into the wall and him pounding up the stairs. I could hear him breathing heavily, like he was almost growling. The bathroom door was locked, but it was only a frail wooden door. It didn't take him much time to smash it open. He screamed at me about how I'd been talking to someone else while we were split up, and how could I, despite the fact he had been with someone else hooking up in his friend circle. I explained to him that it was only texting, and that we were split up, but all that fell on deaf ears. He went on to rip my vest top strap and rip my boots, and then told me to get out and walk home, which was 5 miles away. I live in the UK in a very quiet area. There tends to be a small village, then like a mile stretch of quiet road, then another village and another mile stretch of road, so on and so on. So I'm walking back on the first part of the quiet road with my top hanging off me, and my boots flapping all over the place as they'd been ripped, when I hear his car pull up alongside me. There was no way I was dealing with him again, so I jumped over a hedge and hid. I remember getting scratched up from the brambles, but I just didn't care. I crouched behind this hedge, hoping he'd just disappear. I heard his car begin driving up and down that road multiple times before he gave in. I figured then it was safe. I ignored all of his calls and luckily made it home safe, running most of the rest of the way. I'd received several messages from him apologizing and telling me how he'd kill himself, but I just didn't really care at that point. After some time, he finally left me alone, and I just concentrated on college and spending time with true friends. I really wished that was the end of my interactions with him, but of course it was not. I was on a night out in the local town with my friends. I had put my ex to the very back of my mind, as it had now been several months without hearing or seeing anything of him. There I was, minding my own business, dancing away, when he just suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He tried to talk to me, which I did acknowledge, but I was not really in the mood for it, so I immediately left to go to the toilets near the exit and decide how to best handle the situation. One of my friends was working at the local Asda that night, and I knew they finished in about an hour, so I decided that I'd leave the club and walk to Asda and wait for them to get off. I knew it'd take about 15 to 20 minutes to get there. In hindsight, this was a really fucking stupid idea, but I just really wanted to get away from him. I peered out of the toilet, and although it was busy, I couldn't see him anywhere. So far, so good. I quickly ran to the cloakroom and handed in my ticket to get my coat back. I shoved it on and ran out the door. There were people outside smoking and just hovering about chatting. I glanced around nervously as I walked through. I still didn't see him, so I figured it was fine for me to dash off. About 10 minutes into my walk though, I started feeling very uneasy. I didn't know why, I was just suddenly full of dread. I turned around, and about 30 feet behind me was my ex, following me, eyes locked on me, not saying a word. He had this evil look on his face. He must have been waiting for me to come out of the toilets, or clocked me getting my coat or something, and kept a small distance behind me the entire time. It was well past 12 a.m. now. The roads were dead because of the time, and there were no nearby houses. I realized in this moment just how badly I had fucked up. I texted my friend quickly, telling her about what's happening, where I am, and where I was trying to go. She tried to call, but I canceled it, as I didn't want him knowing I'd alerted people to whatever this situation was going to turn into. I started to pick up my pace, and I could clearly hear that he was doing so as well. Ahead of me, like out of a horror movie, was an underground pass. It was a walkway that went under the main road and brought you out into the Asda car park. I had to either run through this 100-yard dimly lit tunnel or turn around and face him. I decided fuck it and sprinted through the tunnel. After all, Asda was open on the other side. There would for sure be someone in that car park. They had a 24-hour petrol station and a cash point too, which many people stopped to use. I bolted through. This is when he started to shout at me. You fucking this, you fucking that, the usual. I got through the tunnel and I was so relieved to finally see Asda all lit up, knowing there were several people inside. I noticed a youngish guy on a moped not too far from the entrance. I let down my guard, figuring that I'd be left alone now that someone else was visible. But I was wrong. So very wrong. The next thing I know, I'm being grabbed by my hair. He yanks my phone out of my hand and smashes it on the floor. I start shouting. The moped guy sees us and legs it into the store. Great. Crazy X here starts pulling me backward toward the underpass. I start noping and panicking real hard. If he got me to that underpass, I was screwed. So with all my might, I swung up and punched him as hard as I could in the face. It was then that I remembered he still had a hold of my hair, as he ripped a gigantic clump of it out. He grabbed me again, picking me up by the throat, only to throw me to the floor. I cut up my hands and knees. He was now screaming at me, calling me a bitch for hitting him. At this point, I started to hear shouting, and to my relief, it was getting closer by the second. Turns out the guy on the moped had went to alert staff of the situation outside. A variety of people were now running out to help me, including a security guard, several staff members, and even a customer. My ex tried to run, but he was caught very swiftly. The staff in Asda rang up the police, who were on their way already. I saw my friend and just collapsed into her arms like a baby. Thankfully, the police were there about 5 minutes later. They arrested him and took me to the station to make a statement. They had to take photos of all my injuries, inflicted by someone I had once loved. Bruises, grazes, cuts, a huge patch of missing hair. I felt embarrassed and ashamed. I remember, though, the police officer being very friendly and trying to lighten the mood at least. What happened after was all a blur. I shut myself away and developed bad anxiety and panic attacks due to everything that happened. I remember an officer visiting me telling me about a court date. I didn't attend in the end. In hindsight, I should have, but I couldn't face him in those evil eyes. I didn't want to remember the fear I felt looking at him. I just wanted it to all go away. It was in the local paper that week. Details of his court date, etc. I was told he'd been put in an anger management program and had started counseling. He was forced to face what he was, which I'm glad of, as he was a monster. Even though I haven't seen him since then, I wish to never again. Several years ago, I was taking care of my father's place while he was vacationing in Montreal. There was only myself and my sister at the house during the time, and after a fine meal, she had retired to her room. I, however, decided to watch television lazily on the leather couch. I felt myself drifting off to sleep, though, when the doorbell suddenly rang. I glanced up at the living room clock and thought to myself, who on earth could that be at 11:30 in the evening? I looked through the front window, which had a clear view of the front steps and door. There stood a scraggly-looking fellow, rather untidy in appearance with shaggy blonde hair, an unshaven face, and glasses. Despite initially giving pause to the time of night, I didn't really think much of it at the time and proceeded to the front door to at least greet the stranger. I answered his knock politely, asking, "Hello, can I help you?" He simply asked if James was home. Backstory time. Several years ago, there was a dude named James who did stay with my dad. He worked at the same company as my father, but lived in New York. Well, he and my father had struck an arrangement that he would stay at my dad's house during the week, while going back to his family in New York during the weekends. However, at the time of my story, he had long since retired from that company and moved back to New York permanently. Normally, I'd be a pretty cautious dude, but the context of this previous story made me drop my guard a little bit. In hindsight, creepy guy asking for a fairly popular name should have been the first red flag though. Not thinking much of his request, I told him that James no longer lived here. The creepy guy thanked me and went on his way. As he made his way down the steps though, I noticed his light brown Cadillac had out-of-plate states. I left it at that once he drove off down the street though. Locking the door behind me, I flopped back down on the couch and continued my late-night zoning out on the Discovery Channel. I began to fall asleep again, while another episode of Wild Discovery was starting up, when once again the doorbell rang. I didn't need to look up at the clock to realize that it was well past midnight. Glancing quickly out the front window, I saw it was that same fellow who had asked for James 30 minutes earlier. My first red flag. As I approached the door carefully, my mind began to worry a little, so as I unbolted the deadlock and opened the door, I made sure to keep my foot pressed on it just in case. Once again, I politely asked, "Hello, how can I help you?" He shuffled his feet about and began to tell his tall tale. I know this is gonna sound a little bit weird, but a few years ago I was doing construction in this area, and I noticed there was this real beautiful woman who lived here. She had a beautiful pair of white shoes. I was wondering if perhaps I could have them? My mind began to race. True enough, there was construction going on in the area here a few years ago, as the neighborhood had just recently been developed. But there was no woman living here several years ago. My father was the first owner of this house, and he and my mother had long been divorced, not to mention that my mom lived in another country. My father hadn't even had any girlfriends until fairly recently. In fact, that's why he was in Montreal, to spend time with his girlfriend, who would end up being his future wife. I answered him truthfully that there was no woman living here now, and there never had been. Those shoes in question would probably not be found in my house. He insisted though. But they were the most beautiful pair of white shoes. I really want them. I'll buy them off you. Here, I have... He cut himself off to search in his pockets, which only produced about $10. I shook my head, but then he continued to ask. Please, man, I'll give you the money. Just let me inside and let me look for those shoes. I really need to have them. Hey, look, man, the shoes you're looking for aren't here, so I think you better leave, I said firmly, and began to close the door. Alarm bells were going off in my head, and I knew I had to stop this before things got any weirder. As I began to close the door in what felt like slow motion, I saw him moving his arms forward in an attempt to block me from closing it. I slammed it shut, though, and locked the deadbolt as quickly as I could. I heard him turning the doorknob, trying to force open the door. Once he realized that shit just wasn't gonna happen, though, I heard him tear down the steps. As I ran through the front window to try to get his license plate number, he had already started the car and begun to peel off. I was too late. By this point, adrenaline had kicked in already, and I began searching the house for a weapon. Even though there were several decorative swords hiding on the wall, I decided to go for my trusty golf driver as I went around the house making sure all the possible entrances were locked. After waking my sister and quickly telling her the situation, I then called the police. Once they arrived, I told them what had happened, and after the officer did his police thing, he ended our conversation with, "Well, that's the weirdest damn story I've ever heard." Every once in a while, when I close my eyes, I can see that man's face and hands moving towards my own face, trying to thwart the closing of the door and ruining whatever devious plans he had for the evening. I sometimes wonder what might have been if I hadn't been cautious, if I hadn't been wary about a stranger in the middle of the night, if I had bought his strange story about the white shoes, if he had managed to get his arm into the doorway. But I never wonder for too long. I'm just thankful for things turning in my favor as opposed to his. As one might imagine, this event greatly influenced my own habits and behaviors. Doors and windows always locked and secured, cautiousness about opening my door at night. Hell, just unexpected knocks on the door at any time of day will give me pause. My perspective of what's scary has drastically changed. So it's not that I'm afraid exactly. I've just come to realize fully how lucky my sister and I were that night, and while things worked out in the end for us, why allow that opportunity for things to go wrong ever again by not addressing a few simple things requiring just a few bits of diligence? Sometimes when I think back on this story, I'll try and do some research to see if any similar events, curious crimes, or perhaps even anything more deviant happened in the area around the same time frame. But my research and Google always comes up short. I guess it's probably for the best in the end. I've just recently discovered this subreddit, and I have a story to share that has really traumatized me for quite a while now. I feel like this is a good place to share with. A lot, if not all of the posts I've read here are American or Canadian, so for context, it's important that I start with saying that I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. We do have the odd missing person or scary case here and there, but otherwise it's very generally safe here and not very much happens. What I mean is that it's safe in a way that as a 19-year-old girl, I would feel very comfortable to walk the streets at night or go on hikes alone, because I'm pretty sure that everyone's going to look out for one another generally. This event happened in the summer of 2019. I'll link a location so you can better understand, and hopefully some photos I can find online as well if I can. On this day, my boyfriend and I were headed out to a picnic date to a spot we had visited before plenty of times, Karakiriki Track. It's at the very end of a very long, windy rural farm road off the state highway. So you drive for like 15 to 20 minutes maybe from the main road, down a long farm stretch. At the end is a large cul-de-sac and a surrounding massive farm. The owners of the farm have left the land kind of open to the public as a reserve because there are native trees and other things, and because about a 15-minute walk from the cul-de-sac, there's a small waterfall you can swim in. This track is really popular as it's one of the closest swimming spots to the nearest city, Hamilton. It's also really scenic. You cross footbridges, pass by beautiful creek beds, etc. The farmers still go through every now and then to do their farm work, and there are fenced-off areas as well that the public is not allowed to enter, as they still actively work with the land in these parts. This particular day, my boyfriend and I were super happy because it was empty in the parking lot and it was a super hot summer's day, so that was really rare. The farmer was crossing the cows through the gate on a quad as we arrived. He smiled and gave us a friendly wave. He was an older man, and we had spoken several times before as we were regular visitors. We set off towards the waterfall. We crossed one footbridge and passed through a big paddock of cows. The track is quite narrow and the creek is right off the edges, so you have to be careful walking by. We saw the waterfall and decided against swimming as we had no towels. We headed back towards the car park instead. Now on our way back, we decided to go down a little bit of a steep gravel off-ramp on the track that led to a more private, tree-covered area right by the creek. Here's where it starts. We were kissing and whatnot. I was laying on my tummy reading a book, and my boyfriend was sitting up playing on his phone. He was rubbing my back and playing with my hair. We had been there for about 10 minutes before I turned and glanced up the gravel path. Way up, even further on a hill through one of the farmer's forbidden gates, I saw a big man on a quad bike who I didn't recognize as one of the farmers. After all, there was only an old couple who worked the land there. He was just sitting there staring at my boyfriend and I. I don't even want to think about how long he had been there before we noticed. I told my boyfriend, and as soon as the guy saw we were both looking at him, he opened the gate and started heading down. Now, both of us got up immediately to leave, as we didn't want to have a conversation with the farmer about us getting freaky on his land, which is what we both assumed would happen. But it was so much worse than that. This guy came down the gravel track and ran his quad right through the creek. He left it there running in the water and jumped off. He started talking to himself, saying things like, fuck, I've messed up my quad now. Now I fucked my engine," over and over before he even got near us. My boyfriend and I were gathering our things to leave at this point when he started to beeline straight towards us. He didn't even make small talk, which was really strange, because he went straight into saying, "Hey, have you guys seen any fish? I'm looking for some fish to kill." My boyfriend told the guy there were no fish in the creek at all, as it was fresh water. He was probably best off to maybe try and catch some eel or something. This sent the guy into a random fit of rage. He started yelling, "I don't want no fucking eel, I want some fish!" I had made it a point to not look the guy in the eyes directly, as I didn't want to draw the conversation towards myself because I was already extremely freaked out, and I didn't want him to notice that. My boyfriend is much more of a calm and strong type when it comes to stuff like this. For a second though, I did look at the guy. I thought he looked like his face was slightly deformed, possible Bell's palsy, as I work in aged care and I've seen that look quite a lot. It was quite similar. I bent down to tie my shoe up, and when I was standing back up, that's when I saw a pistol on the man's waist. Now listen to me close. This was the first and last time in my entire life that I had ever seen a real firearm. It's incredibly hard to get one in New Zealand, especially after the regulations following the mass shooting in Christchurch. And not only that, he had one pistol on his belt and was waving another about in his hand randomly while he talked to my boyfriend about wanting to kill some fish. He would aim it down to the creek every now and then, swinging it around on his finger. My boyfriend gave me a stern look. Stern is the best word for it, because the look spoke a million things to me in that moment. He nodded his head toward the gravel hill leading back to the track. I grabbed the 2 bags we had, fake-checked my phone, and told the man that our families were waiting for us back at the car park. He completely ignored what I said though, and instead said something random like, "Hey, that's a cool hat you've got on there," or something that was completely irrelevant. I dismissed myself and said goodbye, and made my way over to the hill. In my mind, I didn't want to look back and see my boyfriend be shot and then a gun pointed at my head or something. I knew that our best bet was me getting up this hill onto the narrow path he couldn't ride his quad down, and sprinting to the farmer's house. As I was walking up the hill, I heard the guy yell out to my boyfriend, "Hey, that's a really pretty girl you've got there." It was like all the intentions of his I didn't want to believe were immediately confirmed. I felt like I would die. My boyfriend, though, said a quick "thank you, we'll be off now," and headed up the hill with me. The guy kept talking on, though, like the conversation had never ended, even though we were far away and headed off now. He stood there with his gun in his hand, watching us leave. As soon as we were around the corner, we sprinted all the way back to where the car park was. There were a bunch of empty bullet casings everywhere. We had run into 2 girls in bikinis just arriving at the spot as we did, and we informed them about everything. They got in their cars and left immediately. We tried to go to the farmer's house to ask if they knew the guy, as we had never seen him on the land before, but they were not home anymore. As for the gun, it was quite freaky for me as I had never seen one before. The pistol looked quite old and rusty, and when we discussed the incident on the way home, my boyfriend suggested that maybe it had been handed down to him from someone else. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the content of this video, Please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide you like my content enough to subscribe, please be sure to hit the bell button right next to the subscribe button and turn notifications to all so you can be notified of every video I post in the future. If you don't feel like doing that though, I post a video nearly every day, so you can just come back every now and then and check up on what you missed. If you guys have any criticisms on what I can do better or any feedback on the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I always enjoy reading all the comments and I try to give them hearts and respond when I can. If you guys would like to reach me for any reason, or you would like to send in a story to be read, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. You'll find a link to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, I also run 2 other channels, Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, where I do true crime videos and dark documentaries respectively. If that kind of content sounds interesting to you, why not go ahead and check it out and see if it is for you. Aside from that though guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.